Welcome to Live on Plato's Cave. I am Mario Veen. This is episode 11, Biology, Technology and Evolution with Pieter Lemmens. The prisoners in Plato's cave have their eyes fixed on the cave wall. Their attention is literally captured by the shadows. They cannot turn their head, and since they've been there all their lives and they cannot look at each other, that means that they have never seen a human being. If you ask them, what is a human being? They would tell you to look at the cave wall to find your answer. But as we know, and they don't, that is not a human being, but a shadow of an artifact carried in front of a fire. In Plato's day, we might think of a marble statue chiseled by an artisan. So what they call human is actually a shadow of a statue, a piece of technology. And those artifacts, in conjunction with the fire, make up the limits of possibility of what the prisoners can experience. In other words, they cannot see a shadow unless it has first been produced as an artifact. So, let me ask you, what is a human being? Don't worry if you cannot answer that immediately. I googled it for you, and this is the answer that Encyclopedia Britannica gives. I quote, "Human being, a culture-bearing primate classified in the genus Homo, especially the species Homo sapiens. Human beings are anatomically similar and related to the great apes, but are distinguished by a more highly developed brain and a resultant capacity for articulate speech and abstract reasoning. In addition, human beings display a marked erectness of body carriage that frees the hands for use as manipulative members, etc., etc. So this is a common answer to that question. A human being is an organism that descended from the great apes and that in the course of biological evolution developed intelligence, speech, and technology. This is the answer to the question given in Plato's cave. Okay, yes, this answer is accurate. But does it really go to the essence of what a human being is? We can say a human being is an organism, but okay, what is an organism? And if human being is really a product of evolution, doesn't the answer of the question change as we continue to evolve? And what happens to this answer when we reckon with the fact that the question, what is a human being, is always asked by a human being? Isn't that kind of subjective? Because the answer to that question is the answer that a human being would give. That's not really objective, is it? What happens if we look closely at our relationship to technology and our relationship to speech, and the relationship between the development of the brain and technological development? For instance, do we really invent and control technology? Couldn't we equally say that technology invents and controls us? Okay, obviously this is a very big question. What is a human being? And there are many different ways of going about answering that. Okay, obviously this is a very big question. What is a human being? But I think I have found just the right human being to guide us through Plato's cave with regard to this question. Pieter Lemmens teaches philosophy and ethics at the Radboud University in Nijmegen. He has published on themes in philosophy of technology, innovation, digital technologies, cognitive enhancements, and on the work of Martin Heidegger, Peter Sloterdijk, and Bernard Stiegler. Peter studied biology and philosophy. His PhD research was initially about the understanding of organism in evolution theory. But he changed his question midway as his own understanding continued to evolve. And he started focusing on questions about the human condition as a technical condition, and how philosophy of technology can help us understanding this. Peter published extensively about all of these issues, and he is an expert in the philosophy of Bernard Stiegler. I will link some of his publications in the description, and I recommend them because both Martin Heidegger and Bernard Stiegler are notoriously difficult philosophers. But Peter manages to describe them in a way that makes sense to people without a background in philosophy. In addition to these articles, I also recommend an accessible introduction to philosophy of technology that Pieter co-authored and which will come out in 2022. It's called The Technical Condition, the Entanglement of Technology, Culture and Society, and I will provide a link to that as well. So in this conversation with Pieter, we will take a journey through Plato's cave by following Pieter's intellectual journey, his thinking path. We will start in biology, that sees human beings as organisms. Then we discuss Heidegger's book Being and Time, where he asks the question of being. Because if we say human being, what is this being of human being? And then we will focus on the work of Bernard Stiegler, a philosopher of technology who thought about the relation between technology, biology, and evolution. Finally, we focus how technological evolution got us into the climate crisis, and on Bernard Stiegler's idea of what needs to happen for us to turn the Anthropocene into what he calls the Neganthropocene, which would be the next stage in human evolution, if we can get there. Pieter, thank you for speaking with me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me, as they always say on podcasts. I'm very honored with it. So.
Sometime in this podcast, I'm going to say, let's unpack this, because I haven't done that yet in my podcast. I'm really looking forward to this conversation because we know each other from a while back when we both worked at Meta, which now is quite funny with the new Facebook name change, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I didn't thought about that. Yeah. Meta, but Meta is Meta still existing?
I think the name changed. Yeah.
It's about like 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm. In the second episode, when I spoke with Johannes Niederhauser, we also discussed this idea about philosophy. I mean, there's an idea about philosophy and about other things too, that at one point you reach the surface, you come from the cave, you reach the surface, and then you have to try to communicate that insight to the people in the cave, who are, of course, too stupid to understand you. So you have to explain them many times. But basically, there's one idea that you have, and you try to explain that. But then when we spoke together, we discussed Heidegger's interpretation of the cave, where it is more, you go up and down many times, or maybe you go up halfway and you think you're at the surface, but actually later you discover, whoa, there's more to go. And it's more kind of a thinking path than a one-time insight.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
That was my question to you, if we can kind of try to trace your thinking path to where you are now.
Yeah. Concretely, I started off as a scientist at Radboud University in the mid-late 80s as a biologist. I studied biology also, and probably that was still in the cave of science. And at some point, I was already reading a lot of philosophy of science, maybe like Popper and Kuhn, etc., which was very critical with respect to science. And then when I started to follow lectures at Radboud University in philosophy, I really discovered something of which I thought, well, this is what I want to do, right? These are the really interesting questions that were not addressed at the biology institute, right?
What was your reason for studying biology?
Well, what was my reason for? I've always loved animals and nature, and I was very interested in evolution in particular. So evolution, and I'm still interested in evolution, although I'm now more interested in techno-evolution and in bioevolution. But I remember the first book ever that I got from the library in the village where I lived. When I went there with my mother, I was 6 or 7, I guess, was a book on dinosaurs, right? As many young boys I was completely fascinated with dinosaurs. And then, you discover that life, is a process, and that, during the course of geological history, floras and faunas change dramatically, right? And then of course you get to know the Darwinist view of evolution, etc., etc. So I've always been interested in evolution. As a biologist, I also studied evolutionary biology as well as microbiology at Radboud University, and I also finished that study. But for the more, fundamental questions about these issues, what is selection, what is evolution, what are species, what is temporality in biology, what is an organism? These are questions that are not asked and not addressed at biology departments, which is very practical, right? It's very technical affair. You're busy. As a microbiologist doing research at the microbiology department, I was looking at the function of very small subunits in anaerobic protozoa. So there's a very small focus on what is this molecule doing. And I was interested in the bigger questions, and I only saw these questions asked in the philosophy faculty in Nijmegen.
Yeah.
And so I started also there with philosophy of science, first of all, because I was a scientist, a natural scientist. But at some point, I also, took other courses like ethics and phenomenology and metaphysics. And at some point, I discovered Heidegger, right? There was someone who taught a course on Heidegger's Being and Time. And this was for me, a new experience to be able to think like that. Right, to discover that there is a way of thinking called phenomenology.
Yeah,
allows you to enter, to see and observe phenomena in a very different way than science, than biology, in different ways that I was used to be.
What was that difference at the time? If you look at your biology with your biology colleagues, you look at, for instance, an organism that you study or the microbes that you study, how would...
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I studied microbes, but you study it very objectively, right? And at a distance.
You look through the microscope, and that's where you see your object of study.
Exactly. It's at a big distance. You objectify it. You try to find regularities, right? You do a lot of measurement. It's actually the only thing you do as a scientist. You do a lot of measurements. And the discourse on Heidegger was very much about myself, right? We did Being and Time, and that's, of course, a phenomenological analysis of human existence. And that was totally new for me. I was then at a period in my life when I was also dealing on a personal level with existential questions, my mortality, my finitude, etc., etc. And this was very much echoed in Sein und Zeit and in my reading of Sein und Zeit.
Yeah.
And when I started reading it, I didn't know any. Well, I knew a little bit of German, but I actually learned really reading German while going through Sein und Zeit and later on other books of Heidegger, and later on, of course, other philosophy books in German. And I was totally flabbergasted, really. I was totally fascinated with this way of thinking. I became increasingly interested in it. And of course, then you also start to ask, we can go into Heidegger's understanding of human existence, of human being, and how that differs from the biological understanding.
Yeah, well, maybe just to start, what is the main question of Being in Time?
Yeah, the question of being. That's Heidegger's famous question that he asks in that book. And the answer, if you look at the title, Being and Time, the answer that he ultimately gives in this book is that being is a kind of time, a kind of temporality, Zeitlichkeit, as he calls it.
Kind of a spoiler alert.
That's a spoiler alert. Yeah. No, but he also talks about it in the early sections of the book.
Yeah.
But it's the question of being, and what is being as a question that has never been asked in the history of philosophy or as metaphysics. That's what Heidegger claims. While it should be the primary question. And but before being able to answer that question, what being is, he shows that you first need to understand the way of being of the being that asks that question, right? Which is for him uniquely the human being, which he calls Dasein, that book. So he develops a phenomenological analysis of how human beings are, right? Being aware of the fact that if you do that, then you already know in a way, implicitly, right, what being is. Right? You're using this, what he calls a fore-understanding of being, a kind of implicit understanding of being to analyze, explicate human being. And that's the famous hermeneutic circle that he talks about.
Well, we use the word, I don't know if it's the most common word in
it's the most common word, yeah.
We use it all the time.
Yeah,
I am here, you are there, I am a man.
Exactly. It's in every sentence, either explicitly or explicitly, that we use.
Yeah.
So there is an understanding to it, right? And there are also different ways of understanding being. Some things can be true, for instance, or real, right? So we understand it in a way, but not explicitly. We do not really understand what it is, and that was Heidegger's project in Being and Time.
So in Being and Time, he asks a question: what is being? And then his first step is to say, well, who is this? Who is asking this question? Which is a being, who is namely the being who I am.
Yes.
So where is my access to being? Maybe if you compare it to you as a biologist looking through your microscope, you're trying to understand the microbes, whatever you're looking at.
Yes.
But in this case, you are also of course, we also have microbes in our body.
We do a lot. Yeah, that's
right?
what we discovered in the last couple of decades.
And there the idea is maybe if we, for instance, in biology, if we want to know what a human being is, we need to study, well, basically human beings, bodies or parts of processes that are also present in other animals.
Yeah, we in microbiology and in biology as such, we try to understand ourselves as organisms.
Yeah.
As very complex organisms, complex agglomerations of processes, microbial, molecular processes, genetic processes, metabolic processes, etc., etc. And indeed, recently, with the discovery of the so-called microbiome, we know that we consist for a large part of microbes, and there's a lot of microbial DNA into our bodies, which is actually more than what we call human DNA. But these are all objectifying sciences, right?
What is a microbe?
A microbe is a small critter, like a bacteria.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you call viruses also microbes, but certainly bacteria.
Yeah.
Which are very small entities, like one cell. You've got bacteria and protozoa. And that's a microbe, a microscopically small being, either animal or plant-like, that you can only see under the microscope.
And then studying microbes and understanding better how they work would also lead to a better understanding of human beings, because microbes are so essential to us as organisms.
Yeah, that's what we discover now, that there are a lot of microbes in our in our body, and also in our brains, for instance, but also in our digestive tract. Mm-hmm. And without their functioning, we could not function. So they do a lot of stuff for us, and we're increasingly interested in how these microbes, their functioning conditions, all kinds of biological processes, and it promises to be a huge transformation promises to become a huge transformation, especially in health. Our microbiome is very important for our health, much more important than we've always thought. And it's also what it also means is a transformation in how we understand microbes, right? Since Louis Pasteur, who was one of the first discoverers of microbes, we've seen them as dangerous to us, right? Where we're afraid of microbes because they cause diseases, etc., etc. While in this new microbiome paradigm, as you might call it, we more and more realize that there's also lots of positive sides, right? We depend on our symbiosis with microbes, and we consist of microbes. So also what a human being is biologically, the view of it is changing under the influence of the microbiome, right? So what is a human being? Is that only the human, or does it also imply all its microorganisms, and how to understand that? So the whole concept also of species, in a way, is being in a way under attack now, under the influence of the microbiome. But again, that's all very an objective way of looking at human beings, a scientific way, as a bunch of very complex processes.
But it sounds very good. It sounds pretty good. It sounds like if we know, not just the microbes, but also, we have psychology, we have sociology, we have chemistry, we have physics, we have, I could continue, but those are all the sciences, let's say the life sciences that look, amongst other things, about what are human beings.
Yes.
Why do we need Heidegger?
That's a good question. Now we need Heidegger, I think, because he focuses on really for him at least, a very fundamentally different aspect. And that is, again, the aspect of being, right? All disciplines, whether it is biology or psychology or sociology or whatever, in a way, looks at the human as a being, as its biological being or psychological being. And it looks at its traits. What is it made of? And what kind of functions are there? What kind of processes can we see, right? Whereas Heidegger asks, what is the being of human beings? And he emphasized the fact that our being is not itself a being, right? It's a kind of movement. It's not even a process. It's the way how we are in the world, right? It's something that we at this moment are, you could say, doing, but we're also, it's not exactly doing, it's what happens to us now, right? In this interview and the way how we talk. It's a kind of, it's not a trait, right? Like in intelligence of hair color, of eye color. It's how we are in the world.
Yeah.
Right. And what he did in Simon's side is to find out not what are our traits or our attributes, right? But what's our way of being?
Yeah.
And he uncovered a lot of characteristics of our human being, and he called them existentials, right? And existentials are features, you could say, of human being, which he called existence, which are different from our categorical traits, right?
Yeah, so categorical traits, I would think about, we're a primate, we're Homo sapiens, we have maybe a larger brain than other animals, we have language.
Yes, yeah, exactly. All these kinds of things that considers us as certain substances.
But if we would have a list of all those traits, which is of course impossible, but our DNA and our, you can continue probably forever listing all those traits, theoretically. we still wouldn't have the human being.
No, we still wouldn't know about what Heidegger considers to be the essential thing, and that's our existence.
No.
Our way of being, our what he called our Dasein. And what is typical for human Dasein is that it understands being, that it is open to being, and that because of this openness, it can do all this research, right? It can do biological research. It can investigate, its brain, but also, the functioning of trees, or the way that black holes in the universe behave, right? That's only because we have this understanding of being. And this understanding of being is a feature of our way of being, right? It is because we are in a certain way, which Heidegger called existence, standing out, exist in what he sometimes called the clearing of being.
Yeah.
Because of this, it's not a trait. It's our being. It's an ontological characteristic, which he thought of as unique to human beings. Only human beings, as Dasein, have this unique capacity, you could say, although that's not the right word. But there is this unique way of being that allows them to understand being, and only on the basis of this, you can also understand beings, like living beings or social beings, or let's say inorganic beings.
Yeah, so returning to the first question, we first need to understand the one who is asking the question about being.
Yes.
If we have more insight in that, we can also start to maybe better ask other questions, such as in biology, what is an organism? Or other question. Just because you mentioned a few times the word Dasein, which is a strange German word, even for Germans, I guess. Dasein in German just means existence, or
for Germans it means just, I think, existence, like being there. It also means that for Heidegger, but of course Heidegger gave this word a different meaning. For him, he turned it into a key term. Dasein is, human being there in the world, having a certain place or locality, and also being inserted, let's say, in a historical epoch.
Yeah.
Right? And we are this there. That's we exist as being this there.
Yeah.
That's what he wanted to find out, is how is this being there possible.
It's a strange, I don't know why I think about this, but I have a small daughter.
Yes.
Of course, when a child is just born, they stay most of the time with their parents, and after some time they start to go with other people, like grandparents and everything, which is difficult as a parent, but then you always know where she is in the beginning. But then there's another point where, because maybe I'm at work and I don't know if she's with my wife, or my wife took her to my grandparents or something like. I had this, maybe I don't know if it's related, but I had this realization, which is so obvious, but for me it was like, wow, she's always somewhere.
Yeah. She takes she takes her there with her. Right? And because she's still young, and Heidegger never thought about that, about, let's say, the ontogenesis of the there, right? But I think there is of course, a development of the there. If you just are born, right, you have no language, etc., and you have a certain a certain world, which is probably very primitive, consisting of a mother's breast, right, and what Freud called the Milky Way, right, and you can feel warmth, I guess, and cold, and you can cry, and so your world, your is still very primitive, and
everything is there immediately.
Yeah, not in a way, but in a childish way. There is you could say there is an infantile da, which is not yet linguistic, right? But when a child develops this da, let's say this world of the child becomes, of course, increasingly complex. When it starts to know language and starts to read, the world gets bigger, right, and more open.
Yeah.
And when you finally go to school, of course, your da lightens up, so to speak. These are all things that Heidegger never thought about. He never addressed the question of, let's say, an infantile Dasein.
Mm-hmm.
Heidegger in Dasein is always a mature Dasein, right? It's a mature human being that has its own freedom, that is able to behave itself in the world in a certain way. It's implicitly, right? He never addresses that, but that's what it implicitly is.
Yeah.
Because he was never so much interested in these biological questions.
Yeah.
But that's that's.
But you were. So
I were, yes.
You were studying biology, and
exactly.
then you studied philosophy as well.
Yes.
And started reading Heidegger.
Yes.
And Heidegger, who himself was not, he did give some lectures for medics, the Tolkien seminars and everything, but...
Yeah, but it was late in his career.
That was later, yeah, but I was being in time, at least it's not about biology. So how did you connect those, or did you connect them at all?
Yeah, of course I did connect them.
Yeah.
But it took a long time before I really got a hold on how to question it, right? There is... indeed, as you say, Heidegger talked about biology and the organism in, I think it's the late 60s, when he gave this Zollikoner Seminare, the Zollikon seminars, with Medard Bos, who was a Swiss psychologist and I think also psychoanalyst.
Yeah.
And he discussed a lot with these psychologists and psychiatrists on the organismic understanding of the human and the psycholytic understanding. He was very critical, by the way, Heidegger, psychoanalysis, especially Freud. But he also, in the late 20s, early 30s, he had a lecture course on, let's say, biology. Well, not on biology, but on the notion of the organism or on life.
Yeah.
In which he made distinctions between human being as existence and the being of living beings.
Yeah.
Right. That's so he was aware of this difference, of course, but as I said first, he never thought about the ontogenesis of Dasein. You are born as a baby and then you grow up, and how do you enter into this there, or how do you become this fully mature human Dasein? But what he neither addressed, or only tangentially sometimes, and being very dismissive about it, was the evolutionary perspective. Right? Dasein for Heidegger is something that appears, you could say, as by a miracle at the Greek commencement of philosophy, in a way, right, with the pre-Socratics, and then later with Plato and Aristotle. But there's no addressing of the fact that we are, of course, products of a long evolutionary trajectory, right?
Yeah, just as a metaphor, it makes me think of, you probably know this from Monty Python's The Meaning of Life.
I know the movie, yeah.
Yeah, so there's a couple on holiday in Hawaii, sitting in a restaurant, and they don't know what to talk about. So the waiter says, well, we have a conversation menu, and the topic today is philosophy. So here, and they ask, what is philosophy? And then he says something like, well, have you ever wondered why you are here? And then they say, well, something like, well, we went to this other place last year, so this time we decided to come here. No, I mean, like, how did you get here? well, we took the train and the airplane and the bus.
Yeah,
And then, of course, he means like, no, why? But why? Why the why?
yeah.
But then I think many philosophers then dismiss the other question, because they did end up in that restaurant through a certain process as well.
Yeah.
And if you only concentrate on, yeah, but why? What is the meaning of life? What is the reason for existence? And you completely ignore that the story of the dinosaurs and well, the dinosaurs died out, so the other animals had more space to grow, so to speak. And this whole story, you need to think that as well, right?
That's very interesting that you say that. You can zoom in on a certain, let's say, daily situation, like people indeed being on a holiday and sitting somewhere in a restaurant or on a terrace, and then where do you come from, and then you can go like what did we do yesterday, and then we planned this holiday, and you go a couple of weeks, and you can go more and more into the past, right? And ultimately you can go back to your birth and to your parents when they created you, and then to their then when they fell in love, and then your etc. You can go back ultimately all the way to the Big Bang, right? That would be the scientific explanation. Ultimately, if we were infinite knowers, like divine knowers, we would be able to find out all these causalities that ended up being you and her sitting drinking coffee.
Yeah.
Right. And that's, of course, that's an important question. And then a large part of that explanation is, of course, the evolutionary explanation, right, with the origin of life and then the origin of the human. But with what Heidegger is interested in is that moment from which you cannot understand this process anymore, let's say, as an objective physical or physical-chemical or biological process, but as the unfolding of freedom, as what Heidegger would call historicity. We are, according to him, very unique beings, that we differ from animals in the fact that we do not have these instinctive, let's say, automatic behavior repertoires, but we are free in a certain way. And how to understand this freedom is, of course, a big question. But he's interested in this unique way of being, right, that we somehow have, and how that is related to our freedom. But he is interested in describing that, in phenomenologically explicating that, and that's what he does in Being and Time. But what he doesn't do is, in a way, thinking about the genesis of this existence of these possibilities, of these capabilities, right? He's a phenomenologist, where he remains within phenomenology, so he remains focused on the phenomena as they give themselves, right? And also Heidegger is, of course, inserted in a certain historical epoch, right? He lived in Germany. He was born in 1889, right? And he went to school there, and he experienced the First World War, etc., etc. So, but that's his historical situation, so to speak.
Yeah, including a very nasty part.
There's a very nasty part. Yeah, we can talk about that.
Which I don't feel we should go in. We don't
need to
go into it, but we should at least mention it, that he did have some Nazi affiliations, and
well, he was a member of the National Socialist Party until the very end of the war, and he was a rector of the University of Freiburg for, I think, 10 months, from May 1933, when the Reich, so to say, started, until somewhere in 1934 when he resigned, and it also became clear to him that it was not exactly what he thought was going to happen. And but he resigned as a rector, but he never gave up his membership of the National Socialist Party. And yeah, of course, with lately, like a couple of years ago, the so-called Black Notebooks came out, the so-called Schwarze Hefte.
His personal notes and
yeah,
diaries,
they some people call it diaries, but they were certainly not diaries. You don't learn anything about how he whether they had a good time right when they were in France. No, these were all philosophical reflections, but much more free, right, and in a private sphere, and sometimes very interesting, but also sometimes very nasty, and especially in the let's say 1942, 43, there are some passages which are, you know, can be considered to be Nazist in nature. But there's a whole discussion. I don't have a very pronounced, let's say, conviction about that. But,
no, me neither. But I think we should at least mention it if we
should mention it. Yeah. It sticks to Heidegger, and absolutely.
But let's get back to you. So you graduated from university with a deep understanding of biology as well as philosophy, and then you started your PhD. And was that a way of bringing those two worlds together?
Well, not in the first 2 years. Actually, the topic of my PhD project was, first of all, to have a better understanding of the organism. Not only the human organism, but the organism as such. And it had to be a critique of more Darwinist, selectionist understandings of the organism, and showing that the organism has a more active role in its own evolution, or a more subjective role in a way.
No. So it's about the theory of evolution, but then, I mean, if you look at public...
It's still about evolution, yeah.
Yeah, I just want to say, if you look at public debates about evolution, it's usually between evolution and something else. And one part that is often neglected is that evolution is not, it's not one mathematical theory.
No.
It's more a whole field where there are many different people who disagree with each other about fundamental issues, right? And I think this is one of those issues of disagreement.
Yeah, you're totally correct. Most people, when they think about evolution, they think immediately about Darwinist evolution, because that's still the dominant paradigm. And it's still not, of course, it's still not completely, let's say, contradicted. No, certainly not. But there are many other competing theories of evolution as well, like autopoietic theories, theories of self-organization, but many others. And I was interested in these newer, let's say, not so much anti-Darwinist theories, but theories that gave to the organism a more active role. Because in Darwinism, if you think about it, the organism is purely a product, purely a result, you could say, of autonomous forces, right? On the one hand, you have these genetic processes which are completely spontaneous, genetic variation, etc., and the genes are building organisms, right? And on the other side, you have the autonomous force of the environment, which selects every generation a new, let's say, the products of these genes and this genetic variation. So the organism is a purely passive product, right? This is something that the American biologist Lou Wanton pointed at. The organism, which is, you know, the most active, the most complex, the most autonomous being that we know, is considered from a scientific, from a Darwinistic perspective, as a totally passive creature, right? As something that is the product of autonomous blind physical forces. Prima facie, this is pretty weird, right? And you can also show by looking at other theories that it's probably also inadequate.
Yeah.
The organism has a much more active role in its own evolution, right? And that's something that someone like Lamarck already theorized.
Yeah.
We think that Lamarckian evolution is invalid, but it's more and more the case that also with epigenetics, for instance, that it is sort of rehabilitated.
Yeah. Well, and in a parallel universe, you would have finished that PhD, and we
exactly
would have,
yes.
the entire conversation would be about that, which I mean sounds fascinating.
It's fascinating, yeah.
But you changed your mind.
Yes, I changed my mind because I was more and more interested in human evolution. So I've always been, and at some point I started to focus my research more and more on that ultimately, and I didn't find a lot of interesting material with the biologists that I read. Right, a couple of them, but they were mostly, from the 20s and the 30s. I looked a lot at philosophical anthropologists, such as Max Scheler and Arnold Galen and many others, so to speak. And quite accidentally, and that's quite interesting if you think about it, I discovered the work of Bernard Stiegler, who is a famous philosopher of technology that unfortunately died last year. And he is someone that really, in a way, combines, I would say, more, let's say, Heideggerian questions, ontological questions, with more evolutionary questions. And he has a theory on how human Dasein, as understood by Heidegger, right, can be thought of as resulting from an evolutionary process. And that was a big discovery for me. So that's the point when I started to completely change my research and focus on these questions. But there are many, but there are other things as well, like for instance Peter Sloterdijk, who thought a lot about human evolution, but also from let's say an existentialist, phenomenological, onto-anthropological perspective.
And what was the new topic of your PhD thesis?
It was mainly about, one part was the implications of the biotechnology revolution for our understanding of the human condition, of human nature. Does this imply, a completely different human being? I also wrote a lot about, debates in human enhancement, etc., genetic manipulation, etc. But most of the research was on what you could call with Stiegler the human condition as a technical condition. So the understanding of human evolution as a kind of technological evolution, much more so than a biological evolution.
So from a biologist perspective, at one point human beings evolved from other kind of Homo species.
Yes.
And we developed a larger brain. And I'm probably grossly oversimplifying. And so we became smarter, and then we got this thing called technology. So we started using tools, we started farming with fire, the wheel and everything, all the way until the blood blaster, what you call it,
Yeah,
the leaf blower, where you blow. Anyway, I think that's a biologist's understanding, and also maybe, I mean, a lot of natural scientists speak about, well, we're just intelligent apes, and because
yeah.
we're intelligent, we got this thing called technology.
Yeah, that's I still think the usual picture that we first developed intelligence biologically in some kind of way, and then started to develop technology. But with Stiegler and many others, the idea is more that it started off with technology, right? And it is technology and our interaction, our continuous interaction and co-evolution with technology that gave us our intelligence, or rather that human intelligence co-evolves with human technology, right?
And when did that start?
Well, that started with the, let's say, the invention or the creation of the first tools, the first stone tools. Yeah. With Stiegler and also with Heidegger, the question is, of course, this question of human exceptionality. What makes humans so different from animals? And today we tend to think, well, there's not an essential difference, right? There's not an ontological difference. More and more, right? We are just another species, maybe a bit more intelligence, and maybe we use technology, etc., etc. But it's nothing ontologically, nothing essentially different.
And I think in biology as well, the movement is towards we're closer and closer to other species, right? Or even, I shouldn't use the word species, but
yeah, well, for a biologist, the human being, Homo sapiens, is of course simply a species.
Yeah.
And it does not differ in an essential way from other animals or from other species.
And other animals use, well, there are ants that build elaborate labyrinths. We can think about beehives. We can think about chimpanzees using sticks and everything. So isn't that also a kind of technology use?
It depends. It is a use of tools. Technology is something different, I think. But I think so far, we know that animals use tools in very intelligent ways, but they still do not evolve tools. They do not design tools. So there is in their evolutionary trajectory not also an evolution of technology, and this is what is unique for human beings, right?
Yeah.
And but I wanted to go back a little bit to Heidegger for Stiegler. The key to understanding what is unique to the human in terms, in the Heideggerian terms of existence and freedom and being thrown into the world and having a historical mode of being, etc., etc. The key to that all, and the key to, in a way, to everything that is exceptional for humans is techniques, is technology. And what is important for him then is that he understands technology, first of all, in terms of a new, let's say, an additional evolutionary process, right? Whereas all other animals have, they evolve purely, let's say, genetically, through the evolution of genes and natural selection on these genes. Humans also evolve through technology by producing technical artifacts that co-evolve with us. And in this co-evolution and in this constant interaction with technologies, we in fact became human. We became this intelligent, free, ethical, etc., etc. All these characteristics that are unique to the human can be explained ultimately, according to Stiegler, by the fact that we possess this unique technological memory, so to speak, these technological tools that function as a kind of third external memory repository. And this starts with simple stone tools, which become more and more complex, of course, and paleoanthropologists can show that there is a parallelism between the evolution of our brain. You talked about the process of encephalization, that the becoming bigger of our brain, mainly the prefrontal cortex, that there is a parallelism with this evolution and the evolution of technology, which becomes increasingly sophisticated, and there's increasingly more variation. So there is this co-development, co-evolution of human intelligence.
Yeah, I can imagine if you don't have much technology, so to speak, but you have a stone a tool.
Yeah.
And you discover you need to you hunt and you cut, and at one point you discover perhaps that there a certain shape is good for hunting because you can throw it and it pierces the skin, but another shape is actually better for cutting.
Yeah.
And then your children, maybe you die or something, and your children find these two different shaped stones.
Exactly.
They need to crack their brain about what is the difference and everything. So maybe they
I think you describe it perfectly, right? That what Stiegler emphasizes, and it's not something that he himself found out for the first time, because he was very influenced by a French paleoanthropologist, André Leroy-Gourhan, who wrote a very huge book about this, first in the 1940s and then in the 1960s. Gesture and speech, for instance. These first tools are more durable than the organism that creates this tool, right? The biological organism is finite, it's mortal, it dies. But this stone tool remains there indeed to be taken up by the next generation, right? And it can function as a kind of model or a kind of idea to improve upon, to make a more sharp stone knife, as you already showed. And that's the idea, because these stone tools are more durable and can survive those who made it, right?
Which, by the way, now is a big problem, but we'll get to that later.
Yeah, that's now. No. Yeah, we're in a very different stage now. But the thing is that this stone tool is a kind of functions as a memory, right? It functions. What we actually do when we create a stone tool is we inscribe a little bit of technical experience in an object, in a material object.
No.
Right? And another generation can learn from this object and then try to create a better one, a more sophisticated one. That's the idea of technology functioning as a memory device.
Yeah. So the previous episode with Dominic Batman, we discussed it very briefly. I think it's called the tertiary
retention.
Yeah,
but
so what are the first two?
Yeah, but tertiary retention is a concept that comes from a completely different philosophical register, because Stiegler developed that in his dialogue with Husserl.
Yeah,
and Husserl, Leroy-Gourhan is a paleoanthropologist. So that's about anthropology and the evolution of humans. And that's where he talks about, let's say, an external memory.
Yeah.
But Husserl was a phenomenologist, the teacher of Heidegger.
Yeah, there we have the two different perspectives again.
Yeah. And that's, by the way, incidentally, that's typical of Stiegler, much more, I think, than other philosophers, that he combines a lot of intellectual registers. Like there's a lot of phenomenology in it. There's a lot of psychoanalysis. He's influenced by Marxist political economy. There's some Weberian sociology in it. Freudian and Lacanian, well, not Lacanian actually, but Freudian psychoanalysis, and much more. So his discourse is very rich. It is fed by very different philosophical traditions, and one of them, the most important one, still I think, is of course phenomenology, but also deconstruction. He was a pupil of Derrida, and this notion tertiary retention is developed in a dialogue with Husserl, and Husserl distinguished primary retentions.
And just as a note, Husserl was the teacher of
Heidegger.
Yeah.
Edmund Husserl, who was a German Jewish. He was the founder of phenomenology as a philosophical method, and Heidegger. He was a pupil.
And just because it's just too good not to mention, but Stiegler read Husserl in prison. Right?
Yeah, he read Husserl in prison. Yeah, but that's another chapter. But Stiegler read Husserl in prison, but also Heidegger.
Yeah.
And many other philosophers. Yeah.
It's just too good not to. Can you tell it just briefly something about Stiegler? How did Stiegler get to be a philosopher? Story.
Yeah. Well, I talked about the fact that I accidentally stumbled upon Stiegler in the library somehow in I don't know, 2004 or 5. And Stiegler makes a big point about the fact that he became a philosopher by accident, right? Before he started studying philosophy, and that was indeed in prison, right? Because he, in his 20s, he committed a couple of armed bank robberies, no less.
Well, armed, he had a fake weapon, right?
Yeah, okay, yeah, but yeah, that's true. But he committed some bank robberies, right? And he got in jail for that for 5 years, from 1978 to 1983, I think. And in this prison, which was in Toulouse, I think mostly, there was also another prison where he started off, but in Toulouse there was a philosophy library. And he already knew some philosophy, but he started reading a lot of philosophy books. And it is indeed in his cell reading philosophy, being isolated, right? Not being able to go outside, etc., that he came also to his, let's say, his main philosophical insight, which is that our interiority, our thinking, our mind, so to speak, is always already dependent on exteriority, right? On external memories, such as books and paintings, and well, they were not yet.
Being in a prison cell.
Yeah, being in the prison cell, he was thinking through this constant by reading and making notes, of the books that he studied. Right, so the mind, the human mind, needs, let's say, a milieu to operate in, right? And we know that this is first of all a linguistic milieu, the milieu of language that we're also now using, right? But there's also the milieu of technology that is crucial. Conditional for thinking, and that's the main discovery that he did while being in his prison cell, and that was a kind of Husserlian discovery, the discovery of the epoche, but then in a very concrete sense.
Yeah.
And he has written about that in one of his books, which is titled "How I Became a Philosopher." So accidentally, by being in prison, being isolated, being able to read books but not go outside, etc., being alone with his books and with his memory, he discovered, this idea of the, let's say, the technical condition of the mind, of thinking as such.
Yeah. So then technology is a kind of memory.
Yes.
And there's this idea about the tertiary retention.
Yeah, let's say very simply, Husserl distinguishes primary retentions and secondary retentions, and these are simple memories. When he analyzed that in the 20s, he was listening to a recording of a gramophone, let's say a piece by Beethoven. And if you listen to this melody and you hear it and you remember it, and then the music continues and you hear other things, but you have always a primary memory, and that's this little piece of music that you just heard, right? Ta 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 ta. It's something that you remember for, let's say, a couple of seconds, right? That's primary memory. And this is a phenomenological concept, a phenomenological experience. You listen to this music, and you have this experience, and it lingers for some time in your stream of consciousness. And this lingering for some time, which is perceptual, right? It happens here and now. You perceive it.
Yeah.
Senses. That's primary retention.
So that's even primary retention is already different from how we sometimes look at time. If you can say we always live now, but if that's true, then you only hear one note.
Exactly.
But one of my music teachers, I asked one of my music teachers sometime, can you make aren't you afraid that you make mistakes if you perform? And he said, well, I can't make mistakes because there's no, if you play, let's say, a wrong note, it's wrong. Well, first of all, it's wrong in relation to the notes preceding it. So if you suddenly start to play in a different key, that sounds strange. People think, huh?
Yeah.
But then the question of whether it's wrong or not depends on which notes do you play afterwards.
Exactly.
And there's no note that you can play after any note that you cannot, you have to give a new context to it. So then you say, well, now we switch to another key. But you cannot explain that if you just focus on, well, I live now in this moment and I only hear this note. You need like the little context around it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's when he comes up, Husserl, with this concept of the secondary retention. And the secondary retention is not something that you perceive and that then lingers on for a little in the mind, but that's something that you've heard, like this first ta 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 ta. It goes somewhere in your brain, probably, right? It's a neurological process, but you remember it, right? But it's not present. But if you then listen for the second time or a third time to the same piece of music on a gramophone, right? You have this secondary retention. And we all know that hearing a piece of music for the second time is different. You hear different things, you hear more things. And when it's good music, it becomes prettier, it becomes more interesting. And when it's bad music, it becomes less interesting, you could say, as a rule. But you listen to it differently because you have this secondary retention. You already heard ta 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 ta, but now it's not perceptual. It's something that you recall from your mind, right? But it's present in a way while listening for the second time to this piece of music, right? So primary retention is what you immediately at this point in time experience, while secondary experience is what you recall from memory. You see, and that's for Husserl a very important distinction. the distinction between perception and remembrance, or what he also calls sometimes imagination, because you imagine it again by recalling it from memory.
Yeah.
And what Stiegler showed in his analysis, and he does that in the second volume of his magnum opus Technics and Time, that Husserl was only able to make this distinction between primary and secondary retention because he was able to listen to the same recording, right? The exact same recording. So, but he could perceive a difference, right? But he could only perceive a difference because the experience of this exact same recording was different.
Yeah.
And so he could only make this distinction on the basis of having access to what Stiegler then calls a tertiary retention. And the tertiary retention is a technical memory. That is recording, for instance, of Beethoven. It's something that is inscribed in matter, in this case, in a piece of vinyl, a gramophone, or something else, I think.
It could be a transcription of the notes.
A transcription, it could be anything, but it is a recording, an exact recording of something. Yeah. And this tertiary retention is very important for Stiegler because it ultimately also conditions our primary retentions and also our secondary retentions.
What insight did that give you, that concept of tertiary retention? I don't know if this was during your PhD or when you discovered Stiegler. How did you feel it contributed to what you knew already about biology, about biotechnology, about Heidegger?
Yeah, well, this is more the phenomenological register, so it gave me a better insight in Heidegger, right? This is the this is about how the mind works, and tertiary retention is something that Stiegler, he uses it sometimes when he talks about evolution. Let's say with respect to Heidegger, why did it help me to understand Heidegger? Well, Heidegger talks about human beings as historical beings, right? As beings that have a historical legacy, that grow up and are determined by a certain culture, right?
Yeah, just very simply, I was born in 1982, and there was already, thankfully, many things that were there, like culture, like the Dutch language, like television, like airplanes, and
exactly. And then to go back to Dasein again. Dasein is a temporal creature that exists by temporalizing, by constantly being in the world and temporalizing. And how does it do that? It does that by being present, of course, as we are now, but also always by projecting ourselves into the future, right? We're always busy with future plans. We have agendas, etc., etc. And ultimately, there is at the end, of course, our death. But we're always anticipating the future. So we live in the future. We are constantly in what Stiegler calls with Husserl protension. We are potentializing beings. And we are also always already living in the past, right? We accumulate all kinds of experiences, and out of these experiences, we project ourselves into the future.
Yeah.
And our being present is always this projecting ourselves into the future by coming back to ourselves. That's the Heideggerian, that's the basic dynamic of Dasein. We're always anticipating, but also always coming back. And while we do that, we are present. gegenwärtig. And we are also beings that have a cultural legacy that are determined, influenced to a large extent by what our ancestors were, right? The fact that we speak English now, has to do with the fact that there is globalization going on and that we have an Englishification, right, of language in academia. That's why we speak English now. But when we had this conversation in the 80s, when you were still young, we were doing this in Dutch, right? But this Dutch, our mother tongue, is also something that we inherit from our ancestors. And we inherit a lot of culture. You know, we study some kind of science by reading books about Galileo and Einstein and Lorentz and whomever. And Heidegger was, of course, very well aware of this historicity, what he called Geschichtlichkeit, and of the fact that we were determined by the past. But what Stiegler shows is that this is only possible because we have these technical memories, these tertiary retentions, right? We can only go back to our past, a past that we have not ourselves lived, by having access to technical objects from this past, right?
So can I summarize that? If we go back, we started with biology. So we would say there's a biological evolution that can maybe explain what human beings are.
Yeah.
Then well, being and time. I don't want to call it metaphysical, but it's more like, ontological, metaphysical,
it's ontological. Yes,
philosophical. Yeah. That is where we need to look if we want to understand the human being who's asking this question.
Yeah.
And then Stiegler does go back to a more, let's say, material part, but he doesn't go back to the biology. He goes back to the technology.
But to the technology insofar as it co-evolves in a very intimate way with biology.
Let's say, in a differently put, it's we are, I think, myself, but like you speak about what do we inherit, right?
Yeah.
I think one of the things that we inherit in this culture is that there's a distinction between me and the headphones I'm wearing now.
Yeah.
Between biology and technology.
Yes.
And even between the human and the technical. There are all these films about humans and robots, or how humans are different from animals or from robots.
Yeah.
So there's this strict distinction between me as a biological being and me as, let's say, a technical being that uses tools.
Yeah.
So Stiegler challenges that on a very fundamental level.
Yes. He challenges. Also, as biological beings, we are already technologized. The fact, of course, that we have these huge brains, that we have this multifunctional paws, for instance, and that we stand upright, etc., these things are all there because we have interacted with technology for millions of years, right? So our biology is predisposed, so to speak, to function within a technical environment, to function within a culture, right? So even our biology has, let's say, adapted itself to technology by, as Stiegler would say, by adopting constantly new kinds of technologies, right? Yeah. So, but going back a little bit to Heidegger, what Stiegler shows is that the human being can be this temporalizing being that, that exists in the future and in the past simultaneously, that projects itself, that remembers itself, that is historical, as Heidegger would say. That's only possible because we have this technical memory.
So there again, the title is another spoiler alert, because Heidegger wrote Being and Time.
Exactly.
Stiegler writes Technics and Time.
Exactly. So Being and Time is about being human existence as a structure of temporalization, Zeitlichkeit. And Stiegler's answer to this, this temporalization can only be understood from technology, therefore technics and time.
Yeah.
That's indeed the case. But it's technologies are memories implicitly always. But the thing is, and that's important for Stiegler, and that has never been taken into account by Heidegger, is the fact that at some point in our evolution, we started to create technologies that were explicitly intended to be memories, right? These stone tools only incidentally and spontaneously and not intentionally acted as memories, right? But when we started to invent writing systems, like in Sumeria and Egypt, these are technologies, and Stiegler calls them mnemotechnologies, that are explicitly intended to record experience, right? In an exact way. And exactly that is the moment that history in the proper sense of the term emerges, right? Because then we can go back to the past, because we can see what these people have written, right?
Yeah.
On their papyruses or on stones. And that opens up history, right? We can still be there. For instance, that's the point.
Historians, sorry to interrupt you, but
No.
historians make a distinction, right, between history and like the historical human being and the prehistorical human being. And the distinction is, we started writing. We have, we find pyramids, which is architecture. We find also, let's say, dolmens older than that, but in the pyramids there's writing on the wall, which is kind of an instruction for how to go to heaven or how to do certain things.
And history opens up with the invention of mnemotechnologies. Which are memory technologies, which are technologies that are able to record experience and also mental experience, of course. And that allows us to go back to the past and learn from it and reinterpret these things. And that's also, according to Stiegler, how philosophy emerged. Philosophy emerges through writing, right? Through the invention of alphabetic writing in Greece, right? And that's what made philosophy possible, right? Because we can now still talk with Plato and with Aristotle, because we share exactly the same recording technology. Well, not exactly. We most of us do not know Greek anymore, but we have translations. So we can return to Plato. We can see exactly what he said, right? Because it is recorded. We know his words. It's what Stiegler calls an orthothetic recording, right? It's exactly recorded, the words, and that's possible with alphabetic writing technology, what he said. So we can always return and reinterpret what he said, and the whole sequence of reinterpretations is what philosophy is actually all about.
Yeah, which that's actually the reason I called this Life from Plato's Cave, because we are, I think, in a way, what Plato wrote down. I don't know if he wrote it down himself or someone. I think he wrote it down himself.
Yeah, he wrote it down himself.
Yeah, it was actually quite a good.
He was a good writer. He was a very good writer. Yeah, absolutely. And he in a way he hated writing because his philosophy is let's say anti writing. He's very much against writing because well, that's another thing that we might go into. But in fact, he wrote a lot. Socrates was the one who did not write. He was a purely oral philosopher, but very much aware already of the impact of writing technology on the soul, Right? For Stiegler, philosophy is actually a kind of therapeutical practice for learning to be able to deal with this infection of the mind with language technology in a proper way by developing logic and epistemology, etc., etc.
Did Stiegler speak about Plato's allegory of the cave explicitly?
Yeah, the late Stiegler does. Yeah, quite a lot actually. He, as you know, Stiegler intended to write 4 more volumes of his major work, which is Technics and Time.
Yeah.
Now the first.
So number 4 just came out.
Yeah, but only as a manuscript still. Yeah. But I think it will be published at some point.
Yeah.
But there were 3 other volumes to come, and the last volume would be a lot about Plato and Aristotle, a kind of reinterpretation of Plato and Aristotle.
Well, that's really too bad.
Sorry?
It's too bad that it didn't.
Yeah, that's true. But a lot of it can already be found in the Nunnian lectures that were published in 2019 or 20, I think, where he talks a lot about Plato and Aristotle. He does not go explicitly into the cave allegory like Heidegger does, but it's always in the back. For Stiegler, the earlier dialogues are more important, like the Meno and the Phaedrus and the Symposium.
Yeah. So there's no strict distinction between biology and technology, according to Stiegler. But then there's, I think, and also another.
Of course, there is a distinction between biology and technology. But the thing is that and that's a term that he introduces, I think around 2003 or 4. Humans are not only biological creatures or not only organic creatures, but we are also organological creatures.
Yeah.
Because we have a lot of technical organs, right? And these technical organs, all kinds of tools, make up a technical milieu, not so much a natural milieu, more a technotope than a biotope. And it is the case that our biology, our psychosomatic organs are very much adapted to this technical milieu. Yeah. So let's say that technology conditions and intervenes very profoundly in human biology, right? So that our biology is always already attuned to technology, symbiotically existing with technology. So there is, of course, still a difference between biology and technology, although, with the new biotechnologies, this difference is really put into question, right?
Yeah.
But that's another chapter again, I think.
Well, yeah, but there's so we have our genetics, our DNA, our genetic memory as a species. Then we have our epigenetics, which is also in biology a recognition that it's not just your genes determine who you are, but also your experiences, your life and everything, your personal experience. And then there's the epiphylogenetics, which is the technical. My hard drive. If you give me your phone number, I don't want to remember it in my personal memory. I write it down on a piece of paper. But the moment I lose the piece of paper, I lose a part of my memory.
Yeah, a part of your epiphylogenetic memory.
Yeah,
that's true.
And then to complicate it even more, so there is a biological evolution and a technical evolution, which are distinct, but there are both evolutions. It's not just human beings invent technologies and control. I mean, your PhD is called gedreven door techniek, driven by technology.
Driven by technology. That was the idea that I had, that it's not driven by genes anymore, but by technical artifacts. Which start to become important and even determinative for human evolution.
If we look at the banking crisis and climate change and social media and all those kind of things, I think it's becoming increasingly clear that we're not at the steering wheel
Exactly.
of
Yes.
technological evolution.
Yeah.
So,
but according to Stiegler, we never were.
We never were. Yeah, exactly.
No.
So, yeah.
But that we are discovering that now because technology has been accelerating dramatically since the Industrial Revolution. When he starts off his second volume of Technics and Time, which has the title Disorientation, which is about our current disorientation, which is very fundamental and which has to do, first of all, with this technological acceleration, but then, of course, also with the ecological crisis.
Yeah.
But he said, well, someone who lived in the Middle Ages, probably slept in the same bed or the same kind of bed as his parents, right? Because technological evolution went not very fast. We did not see in our environment the change of technology. Well, maybe a new clockwork came in, or maybe but generally the technical environment was pretty stable.
Yeah.
But with the Industrial Revolution, when through all kinds of reasons, for instance, the emergence of capitalism, the change of our technical milieu, of our technical environment, rapidly accelerated. And so then people saw, right, as a phenomenological experience, that the world was changing. Right, and then at that point, you get also philosophy discovers history, like with Hegel, right, and with Nietzsche. We discover ourselves as being historical beings, right, because someone like Kant still thought of human beings as created, right, by a divine entity. But what more and more we experience, and now we're already, I think, in the third or maybe the fourth industrial revolution, that there's this pace of technological change is constantly accelerating. And now we see more and more that, as you said, we're indeed not in the driver's seat, right? There is a kind of internal autonomous dynamic to technology, and we are more following that dynamic, adopting it, so to speak, than that we are, that we are the movers, that we are the instigators. But Stiegler shows that retrospectively we can now see that it has always been the case that technology was in the driver's seat, so to speak, and that it was and that we always responded, so to speak, or followed the process of technical innovation. But it's only since the late 18th, 19th century that it accelerated, and that we become aware of the fact that we're involved in this autonomous process. Well, it's not that we only follow it, right? There is a space of negotiation, right? But it's not that we like sovereignly determine the goals where we go. No, it's we. That's mostly what we do afterwards, right? We've never invented the internet with having in mind what it now became, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's what Dominic Petman says, right? We're watching while one person is watching maybe a beheading by ISIS or the climate change summit, and then somebody else is watching a cat video, and they're all there together.
The internet, which is the latest kind of what Stiegler would call a mnemotechnology, right, is completely overthrowing our world and our social relations and nature and our politics. Everything is in a big crisis now. Everybody who looks at the news can see this, and this crisis is, of course, first of all, I would say ecological or geological, right? Global warming and the loss of biodiversity, etc., and the destruction of ecosystems. But next to that, there's also this hyper accelerated technological environment, right, in which we have to constantly update our tools and our gadgets, and this produces a lot of disorientation.
Yeah.
And
yeah, even if you buy a smartphone, the first thing you have to do is update it.
Exactly.
And there's, I mean, family members who never. I don't need a smartphone. Why? I've always survived without. Why do I need it? But then they start to discover, well, but actually, all the other people in my family are communicating through WhatsApp, and I'm missing it. So I have to adopt. It's not because I want a smartphone,
exactly.
But if I don't buy one, I'm excluded from a certain kind of, let's say, human interaction between family members. That's quite. I mean, it's quite normal, but if you think about it, that's quite extreme how much technology, so to speak, is in our very private even connection between parents and children and everything.
And even much more so than in the 80s. I'm older than you, so I've experienced let's say the internet revolution. When I was young, like the 80s, there were computers, right? You know, some people had them. I think I had my first MSX computer in, I don't know, 1984 or something like that. It started with computer games, being able to play them on television, right? And at some point, the internet came in the early 90s, and since that, actually, life completely changed. It has accelerated, and it has changed in so many different. Well, what did it change?
But just because that, I mean, we because me too, I can speak about that, one of the first PCs with internet and everything. If people are listening to this that are born, let's say, after 9/11, we sound like very old people, but that has been of all ages, right? I mean, there's always been like, oh, in my day, this and this. So it's technological change is not something new. It's not strange that my parents or my grandparents have a different technological experience because it evolves. But there's something else that is different, and that's in the acceleration, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not just that it's changing, but the speed, the speed which is changing is increasing.
Yeah.
And it doesn't stop.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what do you get when you have first every century, maybe every millennium, a new groundbreaking invention, then every century, every decade, where does that go? You can see it happening in front of your eyes.
Exactly. Yeah, and it changes our being again. It changes our existence, our being in the world. So technology has an ontological effect, right? It's profoundly altering our very way of being. And that's the point that Stiegler is constantly making. But his diagnosis very much was already in the first volume of Techniques and Time, that because of this accelerating pace, also because of the fact that it happens under the condition of global capitalism, that it turns into what he called ill-being or mal-être, right? Somehow this technological juggernaut is very destructive of many things. That's Stiegler's diagnosis. It's destructive of society, of political institutions, of culture, of ecology, obviously, but also, and that's his main focus, of our mind, what he calls the noetic, what he calls noesis, which is the Greek word for mind, nous. As historical beings, we are noetic beings and libidinal beings, which means beings of desire. And that's also something that Dominic Batman writes a lot about the libido. And it is exactly these two characteristics, the fact that we are knowing beings of knowledge, that need to know how to navigate in the world, how to navigate on this planet and in society, etc. And desiring beings, right, who desire to do all kinds of things, to in particular to a good life, but also to friendship and love and science and art, etc. These things are in a crisis, and that is the case because these things are also conditioned by technology, right?
Yeah. And that's the, just to refer back something we spoke about earlier is you said that, you know, the stone tools, you know, why could this let's say how co-evolve with you biological evolution is because the tools outlive us.
Yeah.
But so that's what made the whole thing possible in the first place.
Yes.
But that's now also the problem because my smartphone, I had a I think it's maybe 2 or 3 years old. But I need to buy a new one soon because its battery is not that everything. So, but that's not a problem. I can get a new one. The problem is that my old smartphone is still there.
Yeah.
And it has a lot of nasty stuff inside of it.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's what we're doing on a huge scale.
Exactly.
So we know how to desire. We know how to have the life of the mind to strategize and to get the things that we desire. But we don't know what to do with it once we don't desire it anymore. And
yeah, but Stiegler would say that we do not so much desire anymore as we are more and more driven. We are.
Yeah, it's not even I mean, do I really need a new smartphone? Is that an honest? Is that what I want in my deepest?
No, it's a consumerist desire.
Yeah,
it's a programmed desire. It's conditioned by marketing and by advertisement.
Yeah.
The idea is that because of this technology and because of the fact that that it evolves in a capitalist context, in a consumerist context, that because of that, our long-term desires, let's say our historical desires, which we see manifesting, for instance, in historical projects such as the Enlightenment, right, which desired us to become rational, sovereign, autonomous, learned beings of Bildung, etc., etc. As these desires are eroding, that's Stiegler's diagnosis, right?
Yeah.
And more regressing into what he calls drives. We are more and more focused on the immediacy. We want the newest iPhone, for instance, or we want to see the newest blockbuster on Netflix, and it gives us a lot of cheap thrills, so to speak. But we're less and less capable collectively of desiring other things, for instance, saving the planet, right?
Yeah.
For starters, or completely rechanging our economy, which all these things that we actually need. We need new big projects. We need a super enlightenment, so to speak. And this is only possible through these new technologies, right? But it's also that these technologies are standing in the way. Right, they condition it, but they also decondition it.
Yeah,
that's Stiegler's theory of the pharmacon. Technology is both a poisoning power that undermines all kinds of things that we do, but it's also a healing power, possibly, at least, right? So we always need to invent new therapeutics, as he calls them. And these are simply ways of living or political institutions or regulations or laws that allow us to operate with this technology in rational, civilized, social ways, right? We can easily transform the internet into a big instrument to take care again of the biosphere, for instance. We're not doing that now because big capitalist conglomerations have designed this technology in such a way that it serves consumption, right? It's all about advertising and making money and survey people, and right?
Capturing our attention, our time, so to speak.
Exactly. But this is not necessarily, this does not have to be the case, right? It's not that these technologies are intrinsically, let's say, turning us into consumers or zombies. That's what they do now, but they also in them have the capacity to form the foundation of a completely new world, and that's something that Stiegler very much strived for in his work, right? Towards a complete transformation of the digital infrastructure that we're living in.
So we've discussed quite a few things so far. But you, if I remember correctly, you said you started studying biology because you have a love for nature, right? For different beings. Yeah. Then you studied philosophy. You got into Heidegger ontology. You discovered Stiegler and others, Sloterdijk. We could do a whole episode about Sloterdijk, of course. And coming maybe back full circle to the biosphere, the geosphere, where we're living. So we have the biosphere, the living beings, human beings, the geosphere. Well, we talked about that in another episode with Marcia Björnerud, how this is what is happening on a planetary level. And then we have the technosphere of Bernard Stiegler and others. Can you talk a little bit about how you are using or combining all these insights in your work right now? What is your noetic noosphere occupied with at the moment?
Yeah, with the noosphere and with the technosphere.
Yeah,
and the technosphere is a concept that's also taken over by Stiegler, although he never really develops it. It simply enters his discourse in 2018, but he never really develops it. He uses it also in quite problematic ways, in my view. But the idea of the technosphere was put forward in the context of Earth system science, which is a new scientific discipline or paradigm that studies the Earth as a big unitary system. And the Earth is a system of spheres. You talked about the biosphere, but there's also the hydrosphere and the cryosphere and the atmosphere and the biosphere, which is very important. And it is the biosphere that is the totality of life, of living organisms, that created our planet into what it is. We have this beautiful blue-green globe, right? It's very unique in the cosmos, but that's in a way made by life. And the Earth is a living planet. Some scientists talk about the Earth as Gaia, right? Yeah. A kind of quasi-organismic homeostatic system. Now, when humans enter the scene, and we're already here for 3.5 million years, we have created a new sphere to the planet, which Peter Huff, who's an American scientist, calls the technosphere. And in terms of energy metabolism and of presence on the planet, it is growing at the same level of these other spheres, right? And according to many, it will be the determinative sphere of the planet, this technosphere. That is this total technological infrastructure, of which the internet is, of course, a very important part, but it's also all kinds of transport systems and factories and what have you. It is increasingly impacting the biosphere, right? We are now living on a technological planet, where technology and the human as a technological being, has become the most important force, the most important power on the planet, which means that we have become responsible for the future of the planet.
Just very simply, we talk about CO2 now as CO emissions as that's not our farts. That's not our biological being.
No, that's fossil fuels, of course. Yeah. So, and what we're doing, especially since the Industrial Revolution with this technosphere, is rapidly destroying the Earth as a life support system, right? By global warming, of course, but also by destroying biodiversity, by poisoning ecosystems, etc., in all kinds of ways, but also by poisoning ourselves, right? That's what Stiegler would say. So,
yeah, for instance, Dominic Petman, his title of the book is Infinite Distraction, is because we're also burying our head in social media and in other ways that we don't even notice what is going on with the biosphere.
Yeah, we entertain ourselves on screens with movies and video games, etc. But all around us, the planet is disappearing. That's this very dark picture, but it is in a certain way quite.
So that's a diagnosis. So, Dr. Lemmens, what's the therapy? what needs to happen? What do we need to think about? What do we need to focus on?
These screens need to be repurposed for other things, right? For again taking care collectively of our environments, of our social environments, locally but also globally. We can completely transform them. This is not going to be easy, right? But that's the way forward. And I was talking about Stiegler's idea of the technosphere. What he claims is that it is very much, let's say, a destructive process or entity, because it produces what he calls entropy, right? And entropy is, of course, a concept coming from thermodynamics, and that is the tendency of things to decay or to spread out, right? And if you look at the planet, at the Earth as a living planet, it is a unique entity because it has produced a lot of anti-entropy or negantropy. Life is a very complex thing. Organisms are very complex. So something happens on this planet, something that we do not really completely understand, but that we try to understand physically and thermodynamically. There's a huge production of entropy, right? That's what animals and plants are. They are, thermodynamically a way of producing negantropy, which itself serves the production of increased entropy.
Yeah,
I know that this sounds a little bit complex, maybe, but
entropy is a very complex concept. The most simple explanation, which is always used, is that if I drop a cup, it will, kind of be chaotic. The shards will be there, and you don't really see shards forming into a cup.
Exactly.
So the tendency on a universal level is that things become more spread out,
exactly,
more equal. But if you look around you, you see, if you walk on the sand, you see maybe a natural heaps of sand. Like you think, well, this is just how sand forms. But if you see a sand castle, a child has been playing there, because that is the negantropy, is to make this sand castle. You need to put, let's say, energy, thought, everything in there to put things in order.
Yeah.
But also plants and everything. Those are examples of orderliness of systems. Very complex.
What we call negantropy. This term was introduced by Erwin Schrödinger, an Austrian physicist, in the 1942 book "What is Life," where he showed that life is unique in the universe and that it is not entropic, like, for instance, stars and all other inorganic systems, but are negantropic. Their entropy is constantly increasing, also on an evolutionary scale.
Yeah.
And we now know that the more complex a system is, the more efficiently it can produce entropy. And that's what we need, because otherwise it will rapidly become too hot, right? We need tropical rainforests, we need animals, we need all these biosystems, right? To basically, to put it very simply, to cool the planet.
So to cool the planet, we need complexity.
Yeah, that's putting it very simply.
Yeah.
And we need, so far, life was doing this spontaneously. We know from Gaia theory that the conditions for life on this planet have been constant for millions of years, frankly. And of course, there are differences. We have very hot periods like the Eocene and the Miocene, right? When we had no poles, no ice on the poles. And there were ice ages, so-called snowball Earth ages, when the whole planet was frozen, right? But it always remains within certain parameters, right?
Yeah.
Such that life can continue.
There are feedback loops that are always at work. Yeah. How do you say climate denialists? They say, well, CO2 emissions is natural. That has always happened.
Yeah.
Yes, there's always been a balance between CO2 emissions and CO2. Fossil fuels are a way of storing CO2 in the earth. Yeah. But now we're taking them out and we're burning them.
Yeah, exactly. And we can do that, of course, because of our intelligence and because of our knowledge and our technology.
Yeah.
And because we, and that's another term that's also used in the context of Earth system science, because we have developed this noosphere, the sphere of knowledge. And the noosphere is actually the combined impact on the planet, on the atmosphere, the biosphere, of human scientific and technological intervention, right? Yeah. But it now produces a situation where entropy is increasing. And that's a problem, right? Because if we continue with this, we will end up, destroying the planet. But according to Stiegler, we can reverse this process, right? Technology is not simply an anthropic force, it's also a neganthropic force, right? How do humans differ from animals? Well, what we have done, we have inserted, so to speak, technological infrastructures in our biosystems. And the biosystem is, thermodynamically spoken, simply a way of deferring entropy, right? A very complex way of a very complex process.
Postponing our death.
Postponing our death, yeah. Because death is total entropy, right?
Yeah, but we have medicine, we have all these kind of things. Humans live longer now than they did before.
Yes, exactly. So technology can support or add to our neganthropic tendency, right? And it does, in a certain extent. Artificial intelligence could easily be seen as very much supporting neganthropy, but it doesn't do that now. Technology at the moment is more and more increasing entropy, which is why Stiegler also talks about the Anthropocene as the Anthropocene, as the age of increasing entropy.
Yeah.
But we can change that because technology is a pharmacon, right? It's that which can produce entropy, but it can at the same time also produce negentropy. So we need to invent ways in which to much more intelligently and carefully operate with these technologies.
And is that what you referred to earlier as something like the new enlightenment, or the
that could be the new enlightenment?
Then what Stiegler calls the Neganthropocene. So the
Neganthropocene.
If we get there, if we survive the Anthropocene,
then we enter the Neganthropocene.
Yeah, which will be an age where there is the technological evolution and the biological evolution and the noetic evolution, the evolution of the mind, are producing negentropy or imbalance, or part of the like the geological even structure of our planet. Yeah.
New health and new wealth and new social structures and a new desire. This is also important. A new desire for the future, because at the moment our future horizon has also collapsed, right? And that's what the younger generations are feeling, right? There is no future for us, as the punks were already saying in the 1970s.
Yeah, why would I go to college? I just saw this sign. Why would I go to school if
exactly? Yeah,
there's no world anymore?
How to recreate a horizon of hope, of desire. That's one of Stiegler's projects also.
So it's very good to know that even if we can't go into it in depth at the moment, that at least you feel that there is a clear vision of what needs to happen. You're not a fatalist in the sense of, well, this is the end of the earth, or this is just.
I'm not a fatalist, but I'm also not very optimistic personally, because it's going to be a very tall order.
Yeah.
But nobody can see into the future, and when systems get very complex, really weird things can happen, right?
Yeah.
It's not necessarily already too late. I don't think so, but we need to dramatically change. But I think we're in this process now already, and we don't know what is happening, of course.
Well, our prime minister said we need to gradually change
but I think this graduality we need to dramatically change, and
so that's the point. So that's the message. So the basic message that Rutte, our prime minister, said is, well, he said two things. He said at the climate conference, he said action. And then there was a possibility for action, which is stop investing in fossil fuels. But then there was an official statement, which I summarized as quoting Greta Thunberg, blah, blah, blah. That's why we are not doing that. And then there was another message, which the message was good, but only this word gradually. We need to gradually do this.
I think Rutte is a little bit older or younger than me. I don't know exactly, but we're not yet a generation that really experienced the urgency of what is going on. When we, from the 80s, there was the bomb, right? The possibility of the atom bomb, atomic war, which was really depressing in our days. And but there was acid rain, and the climate was a problem, but it was pretty far away, and it was pretty far in the future. At least we thought that. But now this new generation, and I also have a daughter who becomes 17 this month, and they are much more aware of what is going on. Their future is at stake, right? Much more than ours. And Greta Thunberg is part of that generation. So I think generation-wise, you can expect an acceleration in environmental and ecological awareness, and maybe, hopefully, also possibly in political action. But the current political elites are, not yet very supportive, I would think. But their end is nigh, right? And you could see that, for instance, indeed with financiers that stop investing in fossil fuel companies.
And we see in of course the court cases of Milieudefensie to Shell and the government. And,
so really, I think it will accelerate. Of course, a lot of bad things will also happen. We will inevitably encounter a lot of disasters, I think. But with that, I think there will be more and more willingness among larger parts of the population to deal with it. And it will become inevitable, I feel, when the conditions of our industrial civilization, like fossil fuel, etc., will also slowly, degrade or disappear, right? So it will become a kind of necessity.
No.
But I cannot look into the future, of course.
No?
No,
Well, I was just, maybe we should close as well, but I was just thinking about episode 3 with Mika Ball. She had this exhibition which dealt with explicitly with urgency. And the first, when you come in, the first short film is about the figure of Cassandra. And then she makes a comparison with Greta Thunberg and Cassandra with the, this whole bullshit about we need more facts, we need more technological innovation, we need more knowledge. Which is basically the solution. That's the way, if you talk about the people who are in power now, that's the way. If you have a problem, you form a commission, you take your time, you make sure that there is draagvlak. I don't know what it is called in English, like
enough public support.
Then you invest in technological innovation, you study and everything like that. And I think, of course we need to continue with that, but we have enough of that. And now, actually the Rutte's quote is perfect: action, action, action.
And the technologies are already there. It's not, and I'm not in favor of techno-solutionism, as they call it, but neither is Stiegler. I think it's more like inventing new social structures and thinking about the social adoption of technologies than necessarily, think of something new. Of course, we can always think of more sustainable technologies, etc., etc. But what is more important is the change of our societal structures, which are enabled already, to put it in more Marxist terms, with the current means of production. There is everything is in order, so to speak, to create an economy based on commons, for instance. But that will take some time, I guess.
Well, thank you very much for this conversation. Perhaps we will speak another time, because there's so much more to other things to speak about. But just maybe to close, if someone is interested in what we've discussed, but not necessarily doesn't have a philosophical training or something like that, can you suggest a place to start, or a book or something else? Well, of course, we mentioned the Istar before, which is a movie also about Heidegger and Stiegler, but other books that are a good way to start?
You mean on Stiegler specifically, or
about just anything that we discussed that you feel would contribute to facing the problems that we are dealing with?
Oh my God!
A big question.
That's a big question. There are so many. In terms for Stiegler, I think you could best start with an interview book that he did in 2011, which is called Philosophizing by Accident, which is a translation in English of some interviews that he did with another French philosopher, which is still, I think, a good introduction to his work. Stiegler is a difficult author. It's not easy to get into his work, because he uses a lot of neologisms, and his writing is not necessarily accessible.
Which is why I really appreciate your writing, because I'll put all the articles in the description, but because how you write in English also about Heidegger and Stiegler, people write, especially Heidegger, people write a lot about Heidegger, but it's so difficult, especially in English, to summarize it in a way that, at least I feel does justice to it. So I can really recommend those articles that I'm reading them right now, and they're helping me a lot to kind of.
Any book on a good book on the Anthropocene, for instance, which I'm very much involved with and interested in at the moment, and then especially the technological aspects. Like I think Clive Hamilton's book, for instance, Defiant Earth, I think it is. It's subtitled the fate of the human in the age of the Anthropocene or something like that, which really sketches very nicely, the picture of the planet and where we're up to, what kinds of challenges that we're confronted with in the future. So,
okay, thank you again.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was a lot of fun, and maybe we can write again, Mario. Who knows?
Thank you for listening. I provided some links to the works we just mentioned and Pieter's articles in the description. Go to livefromplatoscave.com for ways to support this podcast. I hope to see you again next month.